Higgs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, within just mere minutes or hours after the New York Post published its story on the Hunter Biden laptop, at 8:51 a.m., you sent a message to a team, part of your team, I assume, and you said, "It isn't clearly violative of our hacked materials policy," referring to this story, "nor is it clearly in violation of anything else." Do you remember sending that message?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't recall that message specifically, but that does sound like my judgment on that day, yes.
Okay, so that was early on in the day, and yet shortly thereafter, Kayleigh McEnany, White House press secretary's, her account was locked. So an inquiry was made the next day by a person named Carolyn Strom. You know Carolyn Strom?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah, Carolyn Strom asked what's going on here, and somebody named Elaine Ong Soto said the user was bounced by site integrity for violating our hacked materials policy. Do you remember that incident?
Yes, sir, I do.
And somebody named Trenton Kennedy said, "I'm struggling to understand the policy basis for marking this as unsafe." And I think the best explainability argument, now that may be a technical term for you, but for me it looks like we're trying to create a narrative here to cover our butt. The best explainability argument for this externally will be that we're waiting to understand if this story is the result of hacked materials. Do you remember Mr. Kennedy's communication?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And so then we get into a whole series of things written by Mr. Baker going back and forth. And he says on that same day, now at 9:26, which is about a half an hour after your statement that you don't think that anything's been violated here, he says, "I've seen some reliable cybersecurity folks question the authenticity of the emails in another way." And then you seem to later, but by the way, that's almost inconceivable. I mean, it just seems inconceivable that would have happened so quickly that he would have that. And then you sent out something right after that said, "The key factor informing our approach is consensus from experts monitoring election security and disinformation that this looks a lot like a hack and leak that learned from the 2016 WikiLeaks approach." I'm wondering if you can name for me today any of the experts that seem to have a consensus at 10:12 a.m. on the morning of October 14th that you put out saying that we're going to rely on some group of experts. Who were they?
Thank you for the question. Twitter did not give me access to any of my documents or emails to prepare for this hearing, and so unfortunately I can't give you a direct answer.
Were there, Mr. Roth, were there experts? Were there people that you consulted that were cybersecurity experts between 9 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. on that day?
My recollection is that we were following discussions about this incident as they unfolded on Twitter. So cybersecurity experts were tweeting about this incident and sharing their perspectives, and that informed some of Twitter's judgment here. But I want to emphasize, as I said in my statement, I didn't think that the evidence or those perspectives warranted removal, and I advocated against taking that action.
I understand. Let's look at one other document. Our teams made the determination that the materials fall under our hacked materials policy. It's my understanding from reports and internal sources that normally a hacked material policy would require a government official or law enforcement determination that there had actually been a hacked account before that hacked policy were to be imposed. Is that accurate?
No, sir, it's not.
So the policy did not require that there be any kind of official finding by a government source?
No, there were a number of different types of evidence that we considered under the policy. Certainly government attribution would be a powerful one, but we also looked
So you weren't looking, that wasn't determinative is what we're saying?
In that instance, we did not have any specific information from any government source, no.
I'm going to read something that applies to this and several other things from the Twitter stack that you guys had. This might be an unpopular opinion, but one one-off ad hoc decisions like this that don't appear rooted in policy are, in my humble opinion, a slippery slope and reflect an alternatively equally dictatorial problem. Quite frankly, that's what the essence of all four of your testimony, I realize you're trying to fight against it, but you exercised. You exercised an amazing amount of clout and power over the entire American electorate by even holding them hostage for 24 hours, reversing your policy, and then they're like, well, we want to go back with the originals. That's 24 hours, or 2 weeks, that you imposed your will on the American electorate. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. He went 30 seconds over. I'll give the ranking member an extra 30 seconds.
You're very fair-minded, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, let me start with you. Did I hear you correctly to say that there were thousands or even hundreds of thousands of counterfeit Twitter accounts set up by Russian propaganda and disinformation for Vladimir Putin to pump his poison into the bloodstream of American social media? Is that right?
That's right, sir. And that's not just past tense. Those accounts are active on social media today. This is an ongoing campaign.
Well, we should be having a hearing about that. I appreciate your alerting to us what's taken place. Ms. Navaroli, so you've testified that in the months leading up to the November 2020 election, and then in the weeks before January 6th, you were growing increasingly anxious about the violent rhetoric and incitement that you saw posted on Twitter. Can you describe specifically what made you so concerned during that period? And did you raise your concerns with people at Twitter?
Thank you for that question. As I said in my opening statement, after former President Trump in his debate said the statement, stand back, stand by to the Proud Boys, my team, in discussion with other teams at Twitter, realized that we had a gap in our policies and that that could not be said on the platform because it would have gone too far. What we did see continue to happen was those statements, in addition to other coded incitement to violence or dog whistles, began to spring up on the platform. And so what was once fringe ideology or fringe statements that were calling for the overthrow of the government became a loud roar. And so we heard individuals beginning to say that they were locked and loaded, that they were ready for Civil War Part 2, that they were ready for another revolution, that they were ready for the day of the rope in very clear English on Twitter.
And on the January 6th committee, we have tens of thousands of statements like that being made on Twitter and other parts of social media. So we got a little taste of what you were experiencing on a daily basis. Now, there was this meeting on January 5th at Twitter. I don't think it was called specifically to look at what was going to happen the next day. That just happened to be a regular meeting. But at that meeting, you and other employees raised urgently the problem of what you saw coming on January 6th. How did Twitter management respond to the concerns that you raised?
That's a great question. And yes, that meeting was a regularly scheduled meeting. Within the meeting, I believe I referred to it in my testimony to the January 6th committee as I was at my wit's end. I had argued, I had asked questions, I had asked for clarification. We had found dangerous tweets within the meeting, and yet the individual who is the most senior leader within the team in that meeting told us that we were not allowed to take that content down and that we were not allowed to use the coded incitement to violence policy. The reason that she gave us mirrored what we had been told by the former head of Trust and Safety, Del Harvey, that individuals might be saying things like locked and loaded or stand back and stand by in ways of self-protection. That was not what we were seeing on the platform.
So when you were seeing things like Locked and Loaded and Civil War Part 2 and Race War and so on, were you warning your superiors at Twitter that you thought there was going to be real violence, that this was not hyperbole that was being spoken at that point?
Absolutely. I specifically told Del Harvey herself that someone was going to get shot, as I testified to to the January 6th committee.
You stated that Donald Trump described his own tweets as little missiles. Why did that stick in your mind?
Yes, the quote that you're referring to, I don't remember exactly what news article that it was in, but it was a news article that I had read in which the former president said that he liked to send out his tweets like little missiles. To me, that sounded exactly like weaponization of a platform in his own words, and yet Twitter was not concerned.
All right. Well, again, this bears a complete hearing on its own. This is a real issue, unlike something that happened a couple years ago for 24 hours that has already disappeared in the sands of time. But this is facing us today. As you say, those right-wing violent forces are still out there, and the social media can still be used as a channel for incitement to violent action against state legislatures, school boards, the Capitol of the United States, Congress, and so on. How do we prevent this from happening in the future, and do you think that Twitter is dealing with this problem effectively now?
As I said in my opening statement, we have to do something. There is too much at stake for us to continue to do nothing. And this question of how do we prevent it is a big one. Unfortunately, I do not believe that we are at a place that we can come to solutions because we do not know how these companies work. We must continue to hear from individuals like myself. We must have a seat at the table to be able to share our experiences, because our experiences and the ways that we have succeeded, the ways that we have failed, hold the key to our futures and the key to our democracies.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say I was skeptical about revisiting the whole New York Post thing, where there have already been congressional hearings and they've already apologized for their little lapse, but this is a serious issue, and so I'm glad we at least have the opportunity to begin to talk about it in public. And I yield back to you. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I'll recognize myself now for questioning. The Biden family investigation begins with the story of how big tech, the media, former intelligence agents, and the Bidens themselves suppressed the story of Hunter Biden's laptop weeks before the 2020 election. Today, we're hearing from Twitter executives who buried the New York Post laptop story, claiming it violated the platform's hacked materials policy. In reality, the Twitter executives were hostile towards conservatives and biased towards anyone who opposed their points of view. For example, Mr. Roth, did you write this tweet?
I regret the language that I used in some of my former tweets, but yes, I did post that.
And I'll read the tweet so it's in the record. Yes, that person in the pink hat is clearly a bigger threat to your brand of feminism than actual Nazis in the White House. Mr. Roth, do you think all conservatives are Nazis?
Certainly not, sir.
What about the hundreds of people who worked in the Trump administration?
Certainly not.
Did Ms. Gaddy or any other lawyer at Twitter ever tell you to take down that tweet?
No, Twitter did not have a practice of restricting employees sharing their personal viewpoints on the service.
Okay. Turning back to the laptop, Ms. Gaddy, are you aware that Hunter Biden's lawyers, as recently as last week, wrote the Department of Justice about Hunter Biden's laptop?
I've seen some articles about that.
Yes, they did. And it appears that Hunter Biden's attorney is admitting that the laptop and emails on it are authentic. So, Ms. Gaddy, on October 14, 2020, did Hunter Biden report to Twitter that he was the victim of a hack?
No, I don't believe he did.
Ms. Gaddy, when the New York Post initially broke the story about the laptop, did you call Hunter Biden's lawyer to ask if it was authentic?
No, I did not.
Isn't it correct that the Biden campaign had contact with Twitter in the run-up to the 2020 election?
Not to my knowledge.
And you're telling this committee that you didn't ask any Biden representative if the laptop was real or for Hunter Biden's attorney's phone number to confirm its authenticity?
We did not speak to anybody related to that.
Mr. Baker, are you aware that the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop since December of 2019?
I'm sorry, am I aware of that now?
Well, were you aware then?
Then, no, I don't believe, sir, that to the best of my recollection, I don't think I knew
But
that.
you're aware now.
I've heard that now, yes.
Mr. Baker, did you call any of your contacts at the FBI to ask whether or not they knew if the material had been hacked?
I don't recall contacting them about that on that day.
Mr. Roth, Ms. Gaddy, and Mr. Baker, it appears to me that you failed at your jobs. You were entrusted with the highest level of power at Twitter, but when you were faced with the New York Post story, instead of allowing people to judge the information for themselves, you rushed to find a reason why the American people shouldn't see it. In a matter of hours, you were deciding on the truth of a story that spans years and dozens of complex international transactions. You did this because you were terrified of Joe Biden not winning the election in 2020. That's what it appeared. I can assure you this committee will succeed in holding the Bidens accountable. So much of the evidence of wrongdoing from this family is located in that hard drive that you all led the American people to believe was Russian disinformation, when in fact it was not. Now, I agree with Mr. Baker's opening statement. The concern for me is the level of involvement the FBI had with not just Twitter, but all of our social media platform companies. And I think it kind of goes in the opposite direction of where my friend, the ranking member, was trying to take this in his opening statement. This is something this committee should be concerned about. The government doesn't have any role in suppressing speech. And that's something the media should be very concerned about. What if there's a conservative president that somehow cleans out our FBI and they put in conservatives to suppress liberal speech? That's something that should never happen. So I look forward to more questions, and at this time I yield to the gentleman from
I think
Ohio.
the chair for yielding. Mr. Baker, you said you didn't talk with the FBI that day. Did you talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to then or after that day?
I'm trying to make sure I can answer this question consistent with the restrictions that I talked about in my opening
Simple
statement.
question. Did you talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden story?
To the best of my recollection, I did not talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden story before that day.
Did you talk to him after it? You said your
don't
response
recall.
was your response is real specific to the chairman. You said, I did not talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden laptop story that day. I assume that day is October 14th. I want to know if you talked to him on the 13th or before, or if you talked to him on the 15th and after.
I don't recall speaking to the FBI, sitting here today, I don't recall speaking to the FBI at all about the Hunter Biden matter.
Well, then why'd you answer
Laptop.
it the way you did?
I beg your pardon?
I yield back to.
Chair recognizes Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Benghazi before, Republicans are on a taxpayer-funded expedition to attack their political rivals, and they're feeding the flames of conspiracy in the process. With the release of the so-called Twitter files, Donald Trump has seized the moment to further his own conspiracies about the 2020 election, writing in December, and I quote, "Do not throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, and even those found in the Constitution," end quote. Now, it bears repeating that this is the same man who incited an insurrection on January 6th, and just last week reposted a message on Truth Social that suggested his supporters will, quote, and I'm quoting him now, "physically fight for him this time," and added, "They got my 6 and we are loaded, and I mean loaded." This is a question for Ms. Navarrete. What did the phrase "locked and loaded" mean to you while you were at Twitter prior to January 6th?
Yes, thank you for that question. The way that I read "locked and loaded" to be interpreted by the tweets that I saw coming on Twitter prior to January 6th was that individuals were loaded, were armed, and that they were ready to commit violence.
Are you concerned that the use of this language will continue to incite and legitimize political violence leading to the next election?
Absolutely. We are sitting exactly 1 month in which the exact same playbook was played in Brazil, and we saw almost deja vu happening again. As I said in my opening statement, unless we do something, this will continue to happen again.
Thank you, Ms. Navarrete. Mr. Roth, you are no stranger to conspiracies and their real-world consequences. if you don't mind, can you please describe for the committee how the release of the so-called Twitter files has affected your personal safety?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The Twitter files, I would note first and foremost, didn't just affect me, but affected much more junior employees at Twitter. Employees as far away as Manila in the Philippines were doxxed, had their families threatened, and experienced harm equal to or greater than what I've experienced. But concurrent with the Twitter files, Elon Musk also made the decision to share a defamatory allegation that I support or condone pedophilia. And this lie led directly to a wave of homophobic and anti-Semitic threats and harassment against me, of which Twitter has removed vanishingly little. And following the Daily Mail's decision to publish where I live, ultimately I had to leave my home and sell it. Those are the consequences for this type of online harassment and speech.
Well, I must say, those are very real consequences. By legitimizing unsubstantiated conspiracy theories about the deep state, big tech, and government censorship for political gain, committee Republicans are holding a match to a powder keg. We all saw the consequences of this kind of rhetoric on January 6th, and we continue to see it play out as political violence and hate crimes grip communities around the country. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Lady yields back.